It's been a really exciting time actually to be able to talk to people because we've been thinking about these sort of plans and potential opportunities for probably 2.5 years, if not more now. Probably the last couple of years with a bit more intent around them. So it is nice. It's a bit like getting to the starting line of a race, really. There's actually a lot of preparation that goes in before that. So it's been really good talking to people. The response has been really warm so far, and I think a lot of people, some obviously, will be more cautious about what the opportunity might be than others. But it's good to be in a position where we can at least start the conversations with people.
Mm. And obviously, you've as a club been having meetings with the membership. There was a letter that went round to residents, and there was a statement that got put out on the website as well. I should say, by the way, I don't know whether Jack mentioned this, but I myself live in one of the flats, so I'm.
He did. He did. I felt slightly more perilous going into this as a result of it, but no, he did mention it to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. So, I mean, I've obviously seen that letter, and there was a few things from that I wanted to explore.
Yeah.
First off, the club's talked about how it's actively exploring opportunities to relocate. I just wonder if you can go into any more detail about quite what that means.
Yeah, it basically means that we've got to a point now whereby we haven't necessarily outgrown the Nevil Road site, but we're beginning to realise that we're starting to outgrow it at quite a pace, and probably to get ahead of that, we need to be looking at opportunities now. So in terms of exploring opportunities, we have got a sort of a conversations have been going on with South Gloucestershire Council and Bristol City Council at various points too, just around what their plans are, what their visions might be for the particular region that we're in, and how they can align with what the needs of the cricket club might be in the future. So they're still very loose, and they're very much at a sort of strategic level rather than necessarily too many specifics as to what might go where and how do people get there and what fits in with what. It's much more of a sort of a strategic level as to sort of shared ambitions and clearly a sense from the cricket club that now's the right time to be having these conversations and starting to think about things. We wanted to be very open with our members in particular and residents about that.
And you mentioned in your answer there this idea that the club is beginning to outgrow Nevil Road. It mentioned that in the letter as well. I wonder if you can elaborate a bit more about what exactly you mean by that.
Yeah, there's probably lots of different elements to it. Really, it's not one particular answer, but a good example would be practically. Nevil Road can be quite challenging at points. We've obviously only really got the two principal entrances and exits, and although we deliver great cricket to great crowds and people are very happy, particularly on the days where attendances and numbers are a bit higher, that does make it a bit more challenging, and obviously puts a lot of pressure on the network roundabout. We've got obviously a lot of what are effectively single lane highways feeding into certainly one half of the ground in particular. And again, you can live with them, but the reality is all you need is for a delivery lorry or scaffolding lorry or something to be in one of those roads, and the whole network grounds to a halt, even on a non-match day, let alone on a match day. So, and that in turn makes it quite practically hard for us to deliver some things we need to deliver. We're quite reliant on temporary infrastructure at the ground, certainly on the really big days. And if you can't get them in and out as easily as you'd like to, and you're disrupting people locally and all those sort of things, it does have an impact. But mostly it's about the opportunity, and we will always be limited by crowd size where we are now. We'll always be limited by the ability to generate revenue from additional sources. So it's about what's the opportunity elsewhere. So it actually comes from a really positive place for us, that we're trying to think about how do we grow the club, how do we keep our ambitions, which are very high, how do we support them, and how do we grow something into the future which will allow more people to come in and hopefully be even more of a sort of a community club and a beacon for international sport in this part of the world.
There's it's sort of insinuated in the content that's gone out that the club isn't in the strongest position financially at the moment, and that's part of the reason for this this idea being explored. I wonder if you're able to say any more on quite what state financially the club is in right now.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So financially, we've had a difficult 2 years. Really, is where we've been. I mean, that does come off the back of we traded a surplus or profit in 7 out of the previous 8 years. So, when we started these conversations, probably financially we were healthier, at least within those financial years. And it's about the big purpose. This is about I suppose, de-risking things and improving our income streams. It's not driven by the financial positions of the club as it is now, because we can actually manage that, effectively, and we've got a good plan for growth and, a consistent level at the Nevil Road site. But it's about how do we ensure that we are not just dependent on one big men's international match a year for our payday, for example, because if the weather hits like it did this year, or we don't quite get the opposition we were hoping for England to be playing, those can have massive, significant seismic effects in terms of the sort of finances of the club, which ultimately then inhibit us in so many other things we want to do. So it's really, it's about, the finances are an important part of it, but it's about how do we grow our finances rather than necessarily whether this year or last year was a particularly difficult one. We can cope with the short-term things, but it's actually how do we secure our financial future, for the long term.
As you can imagine, I've been speaking to some of the other residents and just, Gloucestershire fans in general about this news that's come out this week. Quite a few have been making this point that they feel that the current ground, Nevil Road, is very accessible. It's pretty close to the centre of Bristol. There's a real hub of bars and restaurants and things right on site, pretty much from Gloucester Road. There's the Ashley Down train station, which isn't yet operational, but is about to open. A minute or two's walk away from site from the Ashley Down Road end. And there's a concern, I think, that if the club does move to a South Gloucestershire site outside of the city, it might be more accessible by car, but it will be much less accessible by every other means, pretty much. Presumably, I wonder what your reaction is to that viewpoint, basically, first of all.
Yeah, so taking that sort of two parts, I suppose. Look, we are very sensitive to the residents that are local to the ground, those that are new arrivals and those that have been there for a long time. And this is all very much, it's important to re-emphasize, we are exploring the potential here. There is no sort of guarantee that we've, said that we haven't found anywhere definite to go to. We haven't signed anything. We are exploring that opportunity. And for all the great things of being able to walk up to the ground, it is great in that respect. But and that connection through to Gloucester Road has always been really, really important to us. But actually, the ground itself is lacking, in terms of that ability to generate, like I said, particularly revenue from sources outside of just pure cricket, and the risk around just pure cricket is probably, increasing year on year, dependent on, because as our costs go up. Our energy bills has gone up by £150,000 in the last sort of 2 months, and those aren't sustainable just on cricket returns alone. As to where we could end up if we did end up anywhere else, clearly the transport infrastructure to get there is massively important. It's a hugely important element of what we would do and be looking at. This is not a solo project. We talked around the ambitions of places like South Gloucestershire and what they may want to do locally, and clearly it would make sense that this would be aligned potentially or close to future residential developments, etc. And all of those things, the more people you get into an area, whether that's living or coming to visit something like a cricket club, then the transport plan would change with it. So it's pretty much top of our list, actually, in terms of the conversations we'll be having over the future weeks and months in terms of what a good site could look like, would be how accessible is it. And if it isn't accessible right now, or not as much as we'd like it to be, how do we make it more accessible? And we're very aware of the fact that is a hugely important part of the jigsaw puzzle for us going forwards.
And again, there's been reference to how, if and when the club does move, you would want there to be a lasting cricket legacy at the Nevil Road site. Again, I wonder if you can expand on that a bit, because there's been questions. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean a cricket pitch would stay? Does it mean there'd just be a plaque saying, once upon a time, Gloucestershire cricket played here? Are you able to elaborate on that?
Not especially. The short answer is we wouldn't want to speculate on that, because the whole potential of moving is obviously linked up with what a new ground might look like, what a new ground might cost, and what we leave behind. What I would say is we acknowledge and feel very strongly that Nevil Road has been a really important part of our history. You know, many of us, including myself, have been going there for 4 decades and more. So, you know, we've all got a love of it and a history of it. So we wouldn't certainly want to be leaving Nevil Road without, you know, a significant nod to the fact that, you know, it has been such an important home to Gloucestershire cricket for such a long period of time. But as to what that looks like and you know, what that could be, we don't know yet. But I'm very looking forward to sort of hearing people's ideas as we move forward and we get a better idea of A, whether a move is even the right thing, B, whether, you know, it's possible and in what time frame, and C, what that, you know, therefore would mean for Nevil Road in terms of sort of the two properties handing over.
And I wanted to ask as well, I mean, you've talked about how early stages, you know, there's no guarantees of anything actually happening at this point. Clearly, though, at this stage, the desire is that a move happens. Are you able to say anything about ideal timescale? Are we talking about being in a new site by, you know, the end of the decade? Longer, shorter? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, we will. It will take a short version. It's a bit of a non-answer, I guess, but it will take as long as it will take for us to get there. Clearly, you know, we're not the only partner in this, and whilst we would, you know, there are certain key moments within cricketing history coming up. You know, we've hopefully be hosting the 2026 Women's World Cup at Bristol at Nevil Road. Hopefully, you know, is where we're going to be. 2030 is significant. We've got the Men's World Cup coming to the UK again. So there are key cricketing landmarks in there. But the reality is, I think we're very sensitive to the fact that even if we did go ahead with this, you know, we're not the only partner that would be involved, clearly, you know, in terms of with councils and other people. So, you know, we it's really hard for us to commit. But what we do know is it takes time. You know, it takes time to obviously get the commercial relationships agreed. It takes time to get the infrastructure plans agreed. And it takes time from a cricket point of view, because your average sort of cricket pitch where the players are actually performing, you know, the strips in the middle, takes sort of 3 years plus to bed in. So the reality is we'd probably, you know, we've got to factor that into whatever we would do as well, and then you've got to build the stuff around it. So I think we can safely say it's still a reasonable period of time away.
Obviously, there's been a couple of meetings held with club membership, both
Yep.
within those meetings and outside on social media and things. I'm sure the club's keeping a close eye on reaction to this suggestion. How do you feel the response has been overall?
I think it's been very supportive, actually. I think would be the phrase I'd use. I think it's been, you know, I think people have done as we would have, I suppose, hoped, reacted as we would have hoped, and that everyone's been very considered, which doesn't surprise me at all. We've got a great group of members, and you know, they've all been very considered about what we're trying to do. And I think whether people came into those meetings with a particular view, I don't know. You know, whether there was a high level of support or cynicism before it started, but the message we seem to be getting is, you know, continue to explore. It's understandable that we'll be looking at the things we're looking at, and continue to you know, support the process, at least to the point of, you know, providing a bit more detail in the future. So I think that's sort of, I think where we feel it's got to is that everyone's been some brilliant questions, as you'd expect from that group, and everyone's been, yeah, very very appreciative, I think, of the fact that you know, they've been updated, but also, you know, happy for us to continue investigating at the moment would be the way I describe it.
Nice. And just lastly, you know, I think particularly amongst the flats that overlook the ground, you know, I've seen and heard from, and to some extent have the same anxiety myself. You know, there is a bit of nervousness now around what this could do to the value of people's properties.
Yeah.
I wonder what your message would be to those residents that have those feelings on
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it's a really good point, and you know, in any of these sort of conversations, there's always a really human element to it. I suppose what I'd say is, look, you know, we understand the nervousness. We've obviously spoken to local residents via letter, particularly those immediately closest to the ground. You know, we would love to hear people's thoughts, and you know, if that includes anxieties as well as thoughts, that's absolutely fine. And to put them, you know, to us, and there's an email, I believe, on that letter that went out. So we'd love to hear from people, but it is still very, very, very early days. I would just say that, you know, re-emphasising that fact that we are the phrase that my chair liked to use was, "We are exploring the possibility." And if you think about that, it is a long way from happening. But what we didn't want to do was be disingenuous and not talk to people, whether it's our members or the wider world, or clearly, obviously, the residents and our neighbours. We didn't want to not talk to them at this point in time and say that it is a potential, but it is a very long way off becoming a reality. And I could probably think of 101 reasons why this wouldn't happen, as much as I could probably think of reasons that it would. So it's still very early days. I appreciate that doesn't help in terms of giving people the certainty that they want. But we will update, when we have a bit more certainty, hopefully, which may not be till the sort of spring next year, but that'll be, I think, the next date we'll be looking to probably update people, depending on how clearly, conversations go and how quickly things move along.